Hello, my name's Andrew Fenner. I'm a Christadelphian and I'd like to talk about the Gospels. We find the Gospels in our Bibles at the beginning of the New Testament, so about 2/3 of the way through the Bible. They are written by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, but we believe that they are inspired by God. They were written under inspiration. The four Gospels cover the birth, the life, the death and the resurrection of the Son of God, our Lord Jesus Christ. If you've never really read the Bible, the Gospels are probably a really good place to start because in the Gospels we have the heart of the Bible message. The Gospels, they are four books, but they have this one message, and that one message actually goes throughout all the Bible, but the Gospels are a great starting point. The thing is, sometimes people struggle to believe. They struggle to believe the Bible in general. So what I'd like you to do, just for a moment really, is look at how the Gospels complement each other. As I've said, they were written by four different people with four slightly different perspectives and actually for four different audiences. But what we find that when we look at the Gospels is that actually an author might write what appears to be a throwaway comment in one gospel, or a comment that you think, well, why are we being told this, or that doesn't seem to add up. And then when we read another gospel, we suddenly find another little nugget, and you put the two of them together and it makes complete sense. And there are dozens of these throughout the Gospels. And in fact, if you look throughout the entire Bible, you'll find hundreds, if not thousands of these things whereby you read something in one book and then you find that if you go and look in another book, it makes sense. It all ties together. And that's what I'd like to talk about now. These are sometimes referred to as undesigned scriptural coincidences. And I think that does a slight disservice because I don't believe they're undesigned. I think these have been very much designed by God. I don't believe that they are coincidences. Again, I think that they are there for us to find. They are scriptural, though. I'll give you that. So what are these undesigned scriptural coincidences? What am I talking about? Well, let's just look at an example of the feeding of the 5,000. A very famous miracle performed by Jesus. You'll find across the Gospels. If we were to look at the record in the different Gospels, these are just some quotations. Now, I've taken these out of context, and you should never really do that with Bible verses, because really you need to read around. But just for the sake of illustration, for time, I've pulled out these verses. So Matthew chapter 14, verse 19, he wrote, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass, he being Jesus in this case. Then we read in Mark 6, then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on green grass. John writes, Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Now you may think, oh, right, well, so what? It's just telling people to sit down. Isn't it interesting that all of them mention green grass? And you may think, well, what's so important about green grass? Why was it noteworthy? Why are we being told this fact, the fact that the grass was green? Well, the thing is that grass only grows in the Eastern Mediterranean in March and April. It's all burned up by May. So when we get into the hot summers, it turns to dust. So what this is telling us is that this is actually, all three of them are saying that this is the same incident, and we can actually start to say, well, actually, if there was green grass, we know it was about May, April, or March or April. And in fact, if we delve a little deeper, we are clearly told that, because in the John record, it actually says the Jewish Passover feast was near. This is at the beginning of the chapter, which has this miracle in it. Jewish Passover always takes place in March or April. So we have this little, you may think it's why are they telling us this? These are little signposts to say, look, this is a little detail, but actually it's important detail, because it means that we can actually place this miracle at a certain time. And isn't it interesting that all the gospel writers made mention of it? All of them thought to write this down. This is a undesigned scriptural coincidence. But there are many, many, many more. I'd just like to look at some other aspects of it. The baskets that we used. In the feeding of the 5,000, the word that's used for baskets is the Greek word kophanos, and that translates as panis, a small basket. So the baskets that we used to gather the crumbs were small baskets. When we come to read the account of the feeding of the 4,000, the word then that's used is the Greek word spouros, which means hampers, as in big baskets. So actually, there were different types of baskets. Now, in our English translation, we lose that, we just get the word baskets. But what we actually see is that they used smaller baskets at the feeding of the 5,000 and larger baskets at the feeding of the 4,000. Again, you may say, so what difference does that make? It doesn't make any difference, but what is really interesting is the fact that all the gospel authors use the same words. They don't get them confused. One doesn't use the word spouros for the 5,000 and kophanos for the 4,000. They exactly marry. They use the same word because they were given the same information, and we know that they all tally, and they all sort of fit in beautifully. But we can also see they were obviously two different events because we have this little detail in there. So I'm going to look at three other examples. Three examples whereby we see a verse and we may read it and think, that doesn't really make sense, until we put it with another verse from another gospel. Let's look at these two. This is an incident where Jesus met his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. Let's start reading in Matthew chapter 4, verse 21. And going on from thence, he, Jesus, saw other two brethren, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in a ship with Zebedee their fathers, mending their nets, and he called them. And if we were to read around the whole chapter, you'll see that they instantly followed him. And you may think, well, that's a bit weird. They don't know this man. And he calls them and he goes off and becomes their disciples. Why that wouldn't happen, would it? That wouldn't happen in real life. But what we've got to realise is the chronology of this. If we look in Luke chapter 5 and verse 10, what we actually see is what happened the night before. And in this, if we please take time to read that chapter yourself, and you'll see that James and John, sons of Zebedee, they were fishing over in the night time, and they didn't get any fish. Jesus came along and said, throw your net on the other side of the boat. They went, okay, we'll do it. Didn't really believe him. They did it. They had a huge catch. In fact, it was so huge that the nets broke. That's what happened the night before. So what we are seeing in Matthew chapter 4 is the next day. We know they're the same people because in Luke 5 verse 10 there we can see that they are described as the same people. And now we understand why they were mending their nets, because they've had such a massive haul the night before. We then also understand why they instantly followed them. They did know this man. This was the man who created this miracle the night before. This is the man. This is the reason why they're mending their nets. So it wasn't the first time. And even though Matthew makes it look as though this is the first time they've met, it wasn't. We know from Luke that this directly follows on from this amazing miracle the night before. Again, it seems an odd comment in Matthew, but when we put it with Luke, it makes complete sense. Here's another one. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 16, we read this. When the evening was come, they brought unto him many that were possessed with devils, and he cast out the spirits with his word, and healed all that were sick. Again, if we read the chapter in full, we will see Jesus is in Capernaum, and these are people who are bringing people who are sick to be healed by Jesus because they knew that he could heal them. But the thing that you may think is slightly odd about this is it says, when the evening was come. Now, if you knew that there was somebody who would come into your town that could heal you or heal your sick relative, would you really hang around till the evening? As soon as you knew he was there, you'd be in like a shot, wouldn't you? You'd want to be healed. So why did they wait till evening time? That, again, doesn't seem to make sense, does it? Well, again, if we look at, in this case, the record in Mark, and we see what happened directly before the incident in Matthew, we read, and they, this is Jesus and his disciples, went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day, he entered into the synagogue and taught. So Jesus actually arrived on the Sabbath. Now, under Jewish law, it was forbidden to do any work on the Sabbath, and healing would certainly be classed as work. The other thing about the way the Jewish calendar works is that a day starts in the evening. So once evening had passed, they were into the next day. So the Sabbath ended at sunset and the next day started. Of course, here we are talking about a Jewish nation. These people were Jews. They'd be following the law of Moses. So therefore, they would not be doing anything on the Sabbath, which is why in Matthew, we see that in the evening, i.e., not the Sabbath, the next day, then they brought their sick, because then they knew that they could be healed and they would still be within the law of Moses. So again, a little comment that seems a bit odd is instantly clarified by something from another gospel. Just one more. This is about Herod's relationship with his servants. If we read in Matthew chapter 14, and the opening verses, it says, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch had heard of the fame of Jesus and said unto his servants, this is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Okay, so Herod the Tetrarch. Herod was ruler at this time, and he had already beheaded John the Baptist. He had heard about Jesus. He wants to know who this man Jesus is. Now, if you are the head of the region, then you would have an army beneath you, or you would have advisors, or you may even have a secret police. So if Herod wanted to find out what was going on, surely that's who he would ask. But here it says, he said unto his servants. So why would you ask your servant what's happening? Again, it didn't seem to make sense. You ask the most lowly person what's happening in the world of politics. It doesn't seem to make sense at face value. Until you read this in Luke. This is a description of Jesus and his disciples. And here we see it lists all that were with him. But just look at the end there. One of the women who followed him, in the last line there says, and Joanna, the wife of Chusa, Herod's steward. This then starts to make sense. So this steward that we're reading about in Matthew chapter 14, steward, servant, quite often is changed in our English translations for the same word. This was probably a very specific servant. This was Chusa. And the reason why Herod was asking him is because he knew his wife was a follower. He knew that if he asked him, he would get the inside track on exactly who this man Jesus was. As I say, there are dozens of these throughout the Gospel, and there are hundreds throughout the Bible. Things whereby one thing looks slightly odd in one book or in one chapter or in one account, but then when you put it with something else from another one, it all makes sense. All right, sometimes it takes a little bit of work on our part to really study and work out what's going on. But that's the joy of the Bible. You can study it all your life and you'll still be finding new things that you hadn't spotted. But the most important thing about it, and the most important thing about the Gospels is, as I said at the beginning, there are 4 books, but they have one message. And that one message is the fact that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, rose from the dead. And because of that, we also can rise from the dead. When we die, we can merely sleep and we will be raised to eternal life with him in his kingdom here on earth. That is the message of the gospel. That is the message of the entire Bible. If you'd like to find out more about the gospel, then there are plenty more talks on this channel, or go to gospelonline.co.uk to find out more. Thanks for listening.